I used to have a really hard time appreciating horror movies, but I learned that once you start loving them, it's hard to stop. The Others is written and directed by Alejandro Amenabar and stars Nicole Kidman, Fionnuala Flanagan, Alakina Mann, and James Bentley. The Others is set in 1945, if I'm not mistaken, and it's about this mother of two, Grace, played by Nicole Kidman, who's kind of waiting for her husband to come back home. She hasn't heard from him in like a year and a half after he went off to war, and she has her own problems of her own at home. She suffers from migraines. Her children are extremely sensitive to light, so their life in the house is governed by these really strict rules, like the kids can't go into certain places where the curtains are still drawn. Then one day, three servants arrive at the house and they all begin to feel the presence of these intruders who may be living also in their house. Now this was actually supposed to be my review for Halloween, but I know Halloween's over, but let's still talk about it. Why not? The thing that attracted me to The Others, aside from the fact that my mom really likes it, is the fact that the way they phrase their premise, like really, I could really relate to it because ghost stories have been around forever. But when I heard the phrase somewhere of like people living in your house and you just don't know it, that struck a chord with me because that kind of happened with me. Like I walked into a room, I thought it was just gonna be all storage. It's all fully furnished, like a bed, night tables and stuff. I thought someone was living in our house. So yeah. And while I do think that The Others is still kind of a bit more of a drama than a horror movie, I still think it's a very, very well crafted movie. It has a great script, has a terrific lead performance from Nicole Kidman, great directing also, and through its use of visuals and music, it really just creates this atmosphere that's so consistently creepy throughout the entire movie. First of all, The Others looks incredible. The house they live in, like this whole movie takes place in one house. This house is just so creepy, but it's interesting because the house seems to live in this space between like war and peace, and that kind of reflects Grace's character because Grace, she's trying to carry on normally teaching her kids and whatnot, but at the same time you can tell she's kind of tormented because she's still waiting for her husband. And the house in the same way is really empty and stuff, but it's so clean, like, so it's there's an interesting contrast. It's also cool how there's a detail in the story where the family needs to only open one door at a time. So the fact that the doors are always closed in this movie it fools you into thinking that this house is bigger than it actually is because you never know what's going to be behind the door. There's also this like really saturated, grainy look through the cinematography that really does contribute also to this effect. And it's interesting also that in the story, light takes such an important role. So whenever you see light in the movie, it kind of becomes scary because it's dangerous to the children. But at the same time, because the children can't go into these lighted areas, the darkness feels even more suffocating. It's also great how with the way the camera just kind of moves and frames things that it makes a lot of these spaces feel really vacuous and empty and hollow, but at the same time just the way it moves through these places, it feels kind of claustrophobic. Now understand that The Others is a slow-paced movie, but the slow pace is really necessary for it to build the atmosphere. Like this movie, like right off the bat, needs to make you feel like you're living in the house with them. That's really what it feels like also. And while the pace is slow through the editing, a lot of things are actually happening behind the scenes, and a lot of things are being suggested to the audience just through the things you see. Like most of this movie really is just this giant setup, and the way the movie bounces from Grace to the kids to the servants, you know that a lot of things are happening. The sound in this movie is great also. The fact that the house is so empty, it really amplifies every single sound and really plays with your mind because you start thinking like who's making that sound or if it's actually happening. The score is great too. The score was actually composed by the director and writer, who's the same guy. It has this really old-fashioned feel to it. And this whole plot is really like a slowly unfolding mystery, but it's also kind of a character study of sorts. Barely anything happens externally, like physically. You don't really see a lot of things in this movie. Especially like outside the house, nothing happens there. It's just all mist and stuff. So all the conflict really happens within, and you really need a strong lead character. And I think Grace is a really complex character. She's wonderfully complex because you're not really sure if you can trust her, but you have to trust her. Like she's the only character here that you really can kind of latch onto. But the children and the servants aren't throwaway characters either. They all have depth. They all feel very important to telling the story. And the writing really is great because whenever these characters have conversations and stuff, like more and more is revealed about the characters, especially when you watch this movie a second time. Suddenly you start picking up on little like hints and foreshadowing. In terms of acting, Nicole Kidman gives a great performance in this movie because she has like this ton of emotions just running through her at every single moment. Like, you can see really the complexity of her being a troubled parent, slash wife, plus like the conflict between her being really devoutly Catholic and needing to believe in these beings that are living in her house. The kids also are mostly very good. They have some moments where it's like, oh yeah, child actors, but for the most part, they are quite good. They really do inject personality into the roles. They're not just scared all the time. And what's great about the actors who play the servants, you also never really know if you can trust them. Especially again, the second time around, you start to see little clues and whatnot, and it's just great how they were able to kind of keep the secrets of this movie contained within their acting. And as a director, Alejandro Amenabar really feels like a director from like a different era. He really puts more importance on atmosphere and characters than actual scares because he understands that through building an atmosphere, the audience themselves will find things to be scared of. And again, I keep mentioning watching this movie a second time, and it's really credit to the director for being able to craft this movie well enough that when you watch it a second time, it feels completely different. And I forgot to mention also that this movie has pretty much zero special effects except maybe like the mist and stuff, and it's great that this director is able to, bring out so much tension from all these scenes without the aid of, special effects. It's just all empty corners and, suggested movements and whatnot. If I have any real problems with the others, it's that throughout the movie there are some moments that are a bit too slow for me. And I really did want more from the ending because when they explain what's happening at the ending, it just kind of, it's so sudden, really. And I'm not one to question the logistics of like how ghosts work in a movie, but I really wanted to understand how the ghosts work because in hindsight, when I looked at it again, I was thinking, okay, maybe some of the scares don't make sense anymore because that's how they explained it. But other than that, The Others is a really good movie. It's another good movie for, horror beginners. If you're really not so into horror, try out The Others. It's really creepy, but it's not like jump out of your seat scary, at least in my opinion. You'll see a lot of similarities between this and The Sixth Sense. While I do like The Sixth Sense more, I think The Others, just in terms of like objective filmmaking, is a slightly better movie. Anyway, so that's my review of The Others. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.